For over half a century, Canada has been a world leader in the production, use, and development of life-saving medical isotopes. The world is counting on Canada to expand this leadership role to support the diagnosis and treatment of cancer, ensuring medical equipment is safe for use, and to tackle some of our greatest challenges in health sciences. Welcome to the Canadian Nuclear Isotope Council's Isotopes for Hope podcast with your host, James Scongack, Chair of the CNIC. In this series, we interview Canadian leaders who are making a difference every day. We hope you enjoy this episode of the Isotopes for Hope podcast.
Well, thank you very much for joining us today. I'm really pleased on the Isotopes for Hope podcast to have Riaz Bandali, who's the president of Nordion Canada. Riaz is a long-standing leader in the health sciences sector, not only here in Canada, but around the world. The company that he leads, Nordion, is a global leader in the provision of Cobalt-60. And we're going to talk a lot about Cobalt-60 today, but it's a critical isotope used to sterilize 30% of the world's single-use medical devices. But it's also a life-saving medical isotope in the treatment of brain tumors and breast cancer. Prior to Riaz joining Nordion, his career spanned nearly 3 decades, including several global senior leadership positions, as I mentioned, in life sciences, including serving as the president of early stage and translation sciences at Synos Health, a top 5 global clinical research organization. And he also served as the chief innovation officer for Inventive Health, serving as the president and CEO also of Emerald Health Therapeutics, and has also served as the co-chair of Pure Sunfarms board of directors. Riaz is an individual that I've had the opportunity to work with closely over many years since he joined Nordion, and I can just say Nordion is just a tremendous organization. So thank you very much for joining us today, Riaz.
Delighted to be here with you today, James. I'm looking forward to our discussion.
So Riaz, I often say that Nordion is a Canadian gem. Based in Ottawa, that has linkages all over Canada and all over the world. Can you just spend a few minutes and sort of level set us on the work that Nordion does and your organization, its ownership, its setup, and the role you play both here in Canada and around the world?
Sure, happy to do so. So Nordion is based in Canada, Ontario, where we have a Class 1B licensed nuclear facility. We're part of a broader group called Sotera Health. And Sotera Health's mission is safeguarding global health. And the 200 people at Nordion every day take a lot of pride in what we do with regards to safeguarding global health and improving people's lives. And the way we do that is through our role in the radioisotope sector, and specifically with regards to the provision of Cobalt-60. And Cobalt-60 is a critical isotope, as you referenced, for the sterilization of medical devices, single-use medical devices, as well as for the treatment of cancer through stereotactic radiosurgery. We've been involved in the radioisotope sector for a long time, almost 8 decades. We started off as a public corporation. We've gone through some corporate transformations, but throughout that whole period of time, we've really been focused on the use of radioisotopes for health and medical applications.
So Riaz, why don't we sort of walk through that in a number of pieces? I think Nordion is, as I mentioned, a great Canadian success story. So why don't we first talk about the role of sterilization? I think that this is often an area that that internationally doesn't get the sort of the recognition and the profile that it deserves in terms of ensuring we have clean healthcare, clean hospitals, clean operating rooms, not only here in Canada but around the world. Can you just sort of share with our listeners, what does sterilization mean? And so when you say you sterilize medical equipment, what does that mean? And what role does Nordion play in that?
Sure. So let me start off with a little bit of sterilization 101. So medical devices, single-use medical devices are things like sutures and syringes and hospital masks and hospital gloves and artificial joints and thousands of other devices that are used in tens of thousands of physicians' offices as well as hospitals around the world every day. All of these devices need to be sterile. And to be sterile, there's usually about 3 forms of sterilization technology that's used. Notably, about 30 to 40% of these devices are sterilized using gamma sterilization. And gamma sterilization relies on Cobalt-60. Cobalt-60 is a radioisotope of naturally occurring Cobalt-59. And the way that Cobalt-59 is transitioned into Cobalt-60 is Nordion receives Cobalt-59. We work with our great nuclear energy partners like Bruce Power and OPG to take that Cobalt-59 and place it into nuclear reactors. And depending on the energy and the heat parameters of those reactors, it takes anywhere from 18 months to 60 months to transition that Cobalt-60 through Cobalt-59 through neutron absorption into Cobalt-60. We then take back the Cobalt-60, we actually put it into specialized sealed sources that look like long, thin metal pencils. We then take those pencils and then ship them all around the world in transport containers to gamma irradiation facilities. We then send an installation team. That installation team actually unloads that cobalt and puts it into metal racks that are placed into water pools. The metal racks are lifted up when medical devices are going around a conveyor belt. And what those pencils do is that they emit gamma rays, and those gamma rays pass in and are absorbed by the molecules in the medical devices. Those gamma rays actually kill off any dangerous pathogens. But the energy in those gamma rays is low enough so that it doesn't render any of the devices radioactive. So what you end up doing in sterilization using radioisotopes, specifically Cobalt-60, is you end up creating sterile devices through gamma rays, but you create safe devices because they have no radiation associated with them. And as I said, millions of these devices are used every day around the world to help treat patients.
And I think, Riaz, when we talk about this, the scale of what Nordion is involved in globally through the process you talked about is mind-boggling. So we're really talking about a third of the world's supply. So literally billions of pieces of all the type of medical equipment you talked about, knee replacements, hip replacements, gloves. It's a staggering number. And I remember during the COVID-19 pandemic, and this would be interesting to sort of hear your perspective on this. The demand for sterilization, for obvious reasons, was really high. And so can you just sort of share, give people a sense of the quantity of sterilization you're able to do as Nordion with a relatively small amount of material in the form of Cobalt-60?
Yeah, happy to give you a little bit of a perspective on kind of that topic. So when we think about the COVID-19 pandemic, for me, there were three lessons to learn from the pandemic. One is pandemics aren't entirely predictable. Two, pandemics and future pandemics are likely inevitable. And three, if you want to curtail pandemics, the use of personal protective equipment as well as diagnostic tests is absolutely essential. Now, protective personal equipment and diagnostic tests need to be sterile to be able to be used effectively. And during the pandemic, as you can envision, and as we all know because we experienced it, there was a rapid and immense spike in the need for PPE equipment as well as for diagnostic tests. And that ramp up wasn't only in the production of PPE equipment and diagnostic tests, it was in the need for facilities that could actually ramp up quickly to be able to sterilize this equipment. And that took some time to adjust to. And for us to be able to do that effectively moving forward, we need to have sufficient and ample supplies of cobalt from trusted sources like we have in Canada that can actually help us in terms of providing enough cobalt to the sterilization facilities around the world that are facing a pandemic to allow them to respond effectively and get PPE equipment and diagnostic tests out the door so that we can actually help the impact and curtail pandemics moving forward. And that takes a while. And we felt that in 2020 all the way through 2023, where the ability to actually scale up sufficiently to provide enough inventory to deal with issues like this was a hard thing to do. And the complexity of producing cobalt and utilizing cobalt in medical sterilization is a complex process that Nordion plays a pivotal role in conjunction with our partners. And so it's essential that we have sufficient cobalt every day, because these devices are used every day. And it's even more critical when we face things like a pandemic.
No, I think that's a great perspective. And also to really build on your comments, Riaz, when you look at the role, both from the supply, you mentioned the work at Bruce Power, Ontario Power Generation, Pickering units, soon to be Darlington units, the role of Nordion. Canada really does play a dominant role in this internationally, which a real source of national pride for all of us here in Canada. I now want to shift to we talked about sterilization. And I want to talk about the treatment of brain tumors and breast cancer. And I know this is an area, Riaz, really had a privilege as part of my career to get the chance to work with your colleagues on the development of high specific activity Cobalt-60, which was really taking the same production source and enhancing and innovating that production source between Bruce Power and Nordion for high specific activity Cobalt-60 used in brain tumors and breast cancer. Can you talk about how high specific activity Cobalt-60 is used by Nordion and processed to treat these types of cancer?
Yeah, absolutely. So, as you referenced, right, Nordion actually uses two types of cobalt in its products. The medical device sterilization applications that I've just been talking about actually use low specific activity cobalt. And then when we get into an application that you were referencing, the cancer therapy application, we use high specific activity Cobalt-60, which, as the name implies, is just higher energy Cobalt-60. And we take that Cobalt-60, which we 100% obtain from Bruce Power in Canada. We take that and we put that into specialized sources, and many of those sources are combined and are put into pieces of sophisticated instrumentation that perform a process called stereotactic radiosurgery. And what that means is that a device that performs stereotactic radiosurgery actually takes external gamma beams and it concentrates them specifically using some pretty sophisticated software on a tumor. And what it's intended to do is actually treat that tumor while sparing the surrounding tissue. That stereotactic radiosurgery application has been used by two of our partners. The first partner is Elekta. Elekta uses those cobalt sources in an instrument called the Gamma Knife. And the Gamma Knife, which is actually in place in many hospitals and cancer treatment centers around the world, is used to treat brain cancer. We also have developed a specialized source, again, containing that high specific activity Cobalt-60 for use in the treatment of breast cancer with our partner Excision Biosystems. That application is in clinical trials, and I'm pleased to say it's showing some very promising results in the treatment of early stage breast cancer. Primarily, it's also helping patients with regards to decreasing the amount of treatments that they need and the amount of treatment time that they need for breast cancer treatments, which really makes a difference to their families as well as they go through this process.
Yeah, Riaz, I think that's well said. And I think what's also really unique about both the Gamma Pod and the Gamma Knife technology is when you talk to clinicians, how in addition to having those outcomes that you noted, it is virtually minimally invasive. So historically, to treat these types of brain tumors or when targeting breast cancer, a lot of times these would need a much more intrusive treatment.
Yeah, absolutely. The specificity of the treatment, the ability to do the treatment as essentially an outpatient treatment that happens during the course of the day, and to minimize the number of treatments that hopefully result in a positive outcome for the patient on both the breast cancer as well as the brain tumor treatment, is something that we view as a big advantage. And it's something that all of us at Nordion are very proud to be involved in.
So, I mean, no doubt that you and the team at Nordion and your partners across Canada and the world are making a huge difference. I think the sterilization role that Canada plays, we talked about HSA Cobalt to treat brain tumors and breast cancer. Riaz, you've been in this sector a long time here in Canada and around the world. Maybe I just ask you to sort of look ahead 10 years. if we were having this conversation in 2034, where do you see the sort of the radio pharmaceutical demand globally, and what's your perspective on this in terms of the role that Canada needs to play?
So, great question. I think if you look back historically at what Canada has been able to do, as I said, Nordion's been in the radioisotope field for healthcare applications for almost 8 decades. The treatment that we were just talking about with regards to the gamma pod and the gamma knife originally started off as kind of external gamma beam therapy. That technology, as well as the application of that technology in cancer therapy, was actually developed here in Canada in the 1950s. So Canada has a tremendous history and a capability set that it's built up over time that's focused on radioisotopes for use in nuclear medicine, for use in sterilization. The other thing is we have a duty and an obligation to continue to evolve our capabilities to remain a global leader in this field. And we have some unique infrastructure and a tremendous ecosystem to facilitate that. And specifically what I mean by that is that we've got very innovative science that comes out of places like McMaster University in Hamilton, Ontario, Triumph in Vancouver, BC, the Fedoric Center in Saskatoon. We have access to great nuclear energy partners who are very passionate and committed to the use of radioisotopes in medical applications. People like Bruce Power, as well as OPG, are very committed to that. We have access to some innovation as well as good capital sources to fund early stage companies through CPDC, as well as venture capital firms who are familiar with funding and building radiotherapeutic companies. We have access to some very innovative companies that have built great world-leading positions in radioisotopes, companies like Nordion, Artemis, AtomV, and Point, as well as several others that have built a great infrastructure around this. And, I'd be remiss to not give a shout out to CNIC, who does a great job with regards to helping to build an infrastructure that allows these companies to link together, to look at opportunities for growth, and then does a great job with regards to providing forums like this where we can make sure that Canadians, as well as the Canadian government, is aware of the fact that radioisotopes have a tremendous impact on Canadians' lives every day, as well as the lives of many other people around the world every day. And we've got a great opportunity as we look 10 years ahead to continue to build that out and make it a key economic driver for innovation from Canadians and from Canada.
Riaz, I think you make a really important point, and that is really that, as Canadians, we really have a moral imperative to drive this agenda forward. We have infrastructure that others do not have, that is unlikely to be replicated in other areas of the world. And if your organization, some of the other organizations that you talked about, Bruce Power, OPG, McMaster, CPDC, the Fedoric Center, without those institutions, playing this role, we really have a significant global issue. And it's people are counting on Canada, as we like to say. Riaz, I do want to shift a little bit and really to the production of Cobalt-60, whether it's the low specific activity Cobalt-60 for sterilization or the high specific activity Cobalt-60 for cancer treatments. There's an important link with energy policy here in Canada as well. And that is really, as we know, across Ontario, work going on to extend the operational life for the purpose of electricity production of the units at Bruce Power, the units at Pickering, and the units at Darlington. Oftentimes we don't make the connection between energy policy and medical isotope production, or energy policy in the life sciences. As Nordion, can you just explain to our listeners the importance of those life extension projects in terms of protecting the long-term supply of Cobalt-60?
Yeah, absolutely. I give you my perspective on that. And again, I think as we've talked about, right, I think it's very important for people to realize the absolute outsized role that Canada plays in the production of Cobalt-60 and how critical that is. to being able to maintain capability on the sterilization side, essentially also obviously a little bit on the cancer treatment side throughout the world, right? So if you look at Canada, CANDU technology, which was invented in Canada, has perfect energy and thermal parameters to allow for the effective conversion of Cobalt-59 into Cobalt-60. As you referenced, we have great nuclear reactor partners who are absolutely committed to not only providing green energy capability, but also are very passionate about their role in helping to provide life-saving medical radioisotopes. And that has enabled us to work in partnership with them to be able to get Cobalt-60 into their reactors, and for us to be able to do so on a sustainable basis looking forward to when we think about demand and supply needs, and we need to think about growing demand needs, because there are a lot of drivers that are very similar to the drivers with regards to increasing the amount of healthcare that's needed. We need to make sure that we get access to stable and trusted and growing supply in the future. We also have to remember Cobalt-60 actually decays at 12.5% a year. So to be able to just keep the amount of cobalt flat throughout the world, we need to be able to replenish 12.5% on an annual basis. And we think given drivers like aging demographics, like the access of more healthcare in populous regions like India and China, the amount of money that's been flown in to R&D research for new medical devices, and unfortunately, the increasing incidence of things like cancer and diabetes, the need for cobalt production is going to increase over the next several years at a rate of 3 to 6%. That means we need to be able to access stable supply, and that's actually linked very much into the energy policy of a country, because having sustainable investment in nuclear energy gives us the opportunity to work with our energy partners to ensure that we get things like Cobalt-60 and other radioisotopes incorporated into those nuclear reactors, and we end up with sufficient cobalt to fuel the needs of the world for the next several years and hopefully several decades.
Well, Riaz, look, thank you very much for joining us today. Your insights, as always, are just fantastic. But continue to remind us as Canadians of the important role we play, and the numbers that you continue to communicate and drive every day are very compelling, and always important for us to remember there's patients at the end of the line on this. There's patients that are and physicians and frontline healthcare workers that are counting on sterile medical equipment, clean, modern healthcare, where we don't have, years ago, I'm often reminded of, you would have a higher chance of being adversely affected as a patient from an infection than from the procedure itself. And a lot of the work that you and Nordion and our Canadian nuclear isotope ecosystem do has really changed that trajectory. But also the work for patients and families that are challenged with brain tumors and breast cancer. Really, the work that you and your colleagues at Nordion are doing is impressive. And as Canadians, we're all really proud of you. So thank you very much for joining us today.
Well, it's delightful to be here today, and I thank you for your partnership. And again, I do appreciate the role that Nordion plays across the world when it comes to healthcare and treatment of cancer. But, we wouldn't be able to do it without great partners across the whole Canadian ecosystem. So thank you on behalf of Nordion for helping make such an impact into people's lives.
Great. Thanks, Riaz.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Canadian Nuclear Isotope Council Isotopes for Hope podcast with James Scongack. Please share this podcast and follow us to stay in the loop. To learn more, please visit our website at canadianisotopes.ca.